Hi everyone, this is another deck I want to show you. It's Sultai Graveyard, or how I call it, the Flying Tree. Why this name? This card, Ghoultree, costs 1 less for each creature card in your graveyard, so you can get yourself a 10/10 for a single green mana. And Wander, which when it's in the graveyard and you control an island, gives your creatures flying, hence the Flying Tree. So the idea behind this deck is to mill yourself as much as possible with cards like Hedron Crab, Stitcher Supplier, Satyr Wayfinder, who also helps you find your land drops, Grizzly Salvage, which can find you a creature, or Grapple with the Past, which returns any creature or land card from your graveyard. When you mill yourself, creatures like Ghoultree get really cheap. Its smaller brother, Nemesis of Mortals, costs basically 2 mana for a 5/5 and then can be a 10/10 if you use its monstrous ability. You can activate it at instant speed. Then something like Fiend Artisan, which gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, so it can sometimes be bigger than Ghoultree. Other cards that are threats are as follow. Grist, which is really a perfect planeswalker for this deck because it's a creature while it's in the graveyard. It mills you and creates 1/1s. It can be removal with its -2 and has ideal ultimate, making your opponent lose life for each creature card in your graveyard. CDC if going big is not enough and you need to go wide. When it enters or attacks, you mill 3, and whenever 1 or more creature cards are milled into your graveyard, you create a 2/2. Then Jarad, which is there as let's say a prison breaker card, because you return it to your hand with your last ability and then start using its second ability while it's on the battlefield to make your opponent lose lots of life while sacrificing cards like Ghoultree. Then there are support cards, and there are a thing you need to know. While I was looking for a certain effect, I wanted it to be sticked onto a creature and for this effect to work from the graveyard. So probably the most important card in this deck is Genesis. If it's in your graveyard, at the beginning of your upkeep you can pay 3 mana to return a creature to your hand. So if you have 4 mana, you can pay 3 at the beginning of your upkeep to return a Ghoultree and then cast it for 1 every single turn. You can also return other creatures like, I don't know, Grist or Nemesis of Mortals. The fact that you can do it every turn and it's optional, you don't have to pay 3, makes this card a really powerful grind engine. Another mentioned Wander, which gives your team permanent evasion and is a creature. No to the bone if you need to gain some life. The Hada's ploy is there to let you discard either Wander or Genesis if they end up in your hand. There are creature versions of this effect. I mean the effect that lets you discard cards and work from graveyard, but the Hada's ploy is by far much better. Lastly, Life from the Loam to guarantee your land drops or sometimes mill you. Mana base, there's a lot of fetch lands for Hedron Crab, and with those fetch lands you can get a Triome, some shock lands, basics, and if you see there's a lot of green mana in this deck because it's basically a mono green deck. You're using blue and black to support the main game plan, which is a beat down with big green creatures. Additionally, there are some Boseijus, some mana filtering, mainly to be able to cast Jarad after you sacrifice a swamp, and a colored land that can sometimes mill you. So this is the deck. Let's get into the details. So the main game plan, as I mentioned, is beat down with the big dump creatures and lowering your opponent life to 0, which you can also do with Jarad's second ability or with Grist's ultimate. If going big isn't enough, you have Grist and CDC to go Wight. CDC will be harder to block because it will have flying. The second plan, which comes up usually when you play against control, is to keep returning as many crabs from your graveyard with Genesis and then milling your opponent out with help of life from the Loam if you don't have any lands in your hand. The last way to win the game, it's somewhat cheesy, but you can start using Boseiju on your opponent's non-basic lands and then keep returning them with life from the Loam. It's not always a win, but could lead to one. Maybe let's talk some about creature selection here. So I have chosen those cards like Ghoultree and Nemesis of Mortals. They have a high converted mana cost, so they're kind of immune to prismatic ending. Ghoultree has the advantage of being also resilient to Unholy Heat. On the other hand, Fiend Artisan costs 2 mana, so it's more vulnerable to this kind of removal. It's a best creature of its kind because most creatures that get +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard are 0/0, so when opponent slams something like Rest in Peace, they will die immediately. Fiend Artisan lives because it has 1/1 and just doesn't die if the graveyard is empty. Fiend also has an interesting second ability. It sometimes comes up. So you sacrifice a creature and search for another creature card and put it onto the battlefield. So kind of like a birthing pod. So you can sacrifice one of your cheap creatures to get another one of those. For example, sacrifice Stitcher Supplier, get another one. You can also sacrifice one of those cheap creatures to get another Fiend Artisan. If you have enough mana, you can even get something like Grist or a 4-drop. So that would be the main idea behind this deck, how it works. I have some more information to share. Even though this is a self-milling deck, I am not using Glimpse the Unthinkable because it's only good if you manage to hit Genesis. If you cast it on turn 2 and don't hit Genesis, you're probably screwed. Cards like Grisly Salvage and Grapple with the Past are better because they grant you a card anyway, be it a land if you need one or a creature. So you should avoid playing this card at all costs. I haven't tested Titania, but since I decided to play this land as a one-off, it could be fun to run her alongside it. Maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't. Other cards that could be played in this deck are Runestone, so it's more of a win more card, because the idea is as follows. When it enters, you put a creature from your graveyard on top of your library. Then, at the beginning of your upkeep, you look at that card. If it's a card with converted mana 6 or more, you flip it. And when it flips, it turns into this. A creature that, when it attacks, creates a tapped and attacking copy of another attacking creature. There's also more text on this card, and if that creature is a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus or Serpent, you create 2 of those tokens. So if you think Nemesis of Mortals looks like a serpent, it's actually a snake. So no double tokens. Another interesting card is Ghoulcolor's Harvest, which can help you go white and has flashback. Last card I could suggest to you is Brokos Apex of Forever, but I can't show it here because X-Mage doesn't have mutate creatures. Is this guy, Brokos Apex of Forever. So you mostly care about its last ability, that you can cast it from your graveyard using its mutate ability. So you can mutate it for 5 mana on top of a cheap creature you control. This way you will have a 6/6 Hedron Crab with Trample and Landfall, or a 6/6 Stitcher Supplier with Trample and this dice ability. You could even cast it under one of your bigger creatures to give it Trample. So that's something to keep in mind. I haven't tested it of course, because it's not on the X-Mage, but I think it's worth giving it a shot. So that's the Sultai version of this deck. However, I also experimented some with red by cutting black entirely. So instead of black milling spells, you would play Merfolk Secret Keeper, Otherworldly Gaze, or Tracker's Instincts. And then there are 2, let's say, combos. So you play 2 cards with Jumpstart. They let you discard a card, so you could use them to discard either of those. But Maximize Velocity gives haste to a creature, and a combo I wanted to work is with Cage Breakers. So you would cast it, give it haste and attack, and by attacking you would make a 2/2 green wolf for each creature card in your graveyard that's tapped and attacking. Those wolves would also have flying. Another one is Gravitic Punch, which basically says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target player. So you could finish your opponent off with a big creature like Ghoultree or Fiend Artisan. Or even Crowl Harpooner, because it could get really huge. However, I experimented very little with the Steamer version and I stuck to the Sultai one. Now it's time for the sideboard. So from what I've learned playing this deck is that it's weak to fast combo decks and very fast low to the ground swarm aggro decks. So to combat this, we have Pithing Needle and Unmoored Ego against combo. Pithing Needle also has an upside of being really effective against Graveyard Hate, because most of Graveyard Hate is in form of activated abilities, usually from artifacts like Relic of Progenitus, Unlicensed Hairs, Tormod Script, Nihil Spellbomb, things like that. So you could use it against Graveyard Hate. However, if Graveyard Hate is in the form of Rest in Peace or Leyline of the Void, you can be using Foundation Breaker as well as Boseiju. So there's a lot of artifact and enchantment hate in this deck. If you really don't want to deal with Graveyard Hate as much, you could play 4 Torrent Elementals instead, because it has an ability that for 5 mana lets you put it from exile onto the battlefield. So if opponent has, let's say, Rest in Peace, you pay 5 mana to return it from exile to the battlefield, and when it dies it will get exile because of Rest in Peace. So you could cast it continuously for 5 mana over and over, and don't worry about Graveyard Hate as much. As I said, Swarm aggro decks could be a problem, but they are not as popular with how prevalent Fury and Solitude are. But in case you need to beat them, I would suggest something like Shriekmaw, that you can evoke for 2 and kill a creature, and then at 5 mana, if you have Genesis in your graveyard, you pay 3 mana, get it back, pay 2 again, and put it back into your graveyard, killing a creature in the process. For something faster, there's Witch Vengeance, great against tribals, or Languish. Instead of Shriekmaw, or as another cool trick, you could be playing Colossal Sky Turtle. For 2 mana you can return a creature to its owner's hand, or for 3 mana you can return any card from your graveyard, like, I don't know, Needle, Unmordigo, Languish, things like that. There's also some Graveyard Hate that works from graveyard. Memory's Journey is a lot more than just a Graveyard Hate card. It can let you win games against Thassa's Oracle kind of decks by putting cards on top of their library, or even prevent yourself from milling out. For example, against Living End, when opponent casts Living End, returns a bunch of your creatures to the battlefield, and there will be a bunch of triggers like Stitcher Supplier, entering and dying, Satyr Wayfinder, entering, milling you, CDC, entering, milling. So it's to prevent you from dying, basically, from milling out. More life gain, and that would be sideboard. Do I have anything more to say? Probably not. I'll also make another video with a budget version of this in Golgari colors, but that's it for now. That was Sultai Flying Tree.